Part Three, Chapter 1 of The Possessed by Fyodor Dostoyevsky, translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Part Three, Chapter 1. The Fête, First Part, Section 1 and 2a. The fête took place in spite of all the perplexities of the preceding Shpiegelin day. I believe that even if Lembke had died the previous night, the fête would still have taken place next morning, so peculiar was the significance Yulia Mihailovna attached to it. Alas, up to the last moment she was blind and had no inkling of the state of public feeling. No one believed at last that the festive day would pass without some tremendous scandal, some catastrophe as some people expressed it, rubbing their hands in anticipation. Many people, it is true, tried to assume a frowning and diplomatic countenance, but speaking generally, every Russian is inordinately delighted at any public scandal and disorder. It is true that we did feel something much more serious than the mere craving for a scandal. There was a general feeling of irritation, a feeling of implacable resentment. Every one seemed thoroughly disgusted with everything. A kind of bewildered cynicism, a forced, as it were, strained cynicism, was predominant in every one. The only people who were free from bewilderment were the ladies, and they were clear on only one point, their remorseless detestation of Yulia Mihailovna. Ladies of all shades of opinion were agreed in this. And she, poor dear, had no suspicion. Up to the last hour she was persuaded that she was surrounded by followers, and that they were still fanatically devoted to her. I have already hinted that some low fellows of different sorts had made their appearance amongst us. In turbulent times of upheaval or transition, low characters always come to the front everywhere. I am not speaking now of the so‐called advanced people who are always in a hurry to be in advance of every one else, their absorbing anxiety, and who always have some more or less definite, though often very stupid, aim. No, I am speaking only of the riff-raff. In this period of transition this riff-raff, which exists in every society, rises to the surface, and is not only without any aim, but has not even a symptom of an idea. It merely does its utmost to give expression to uneasiness and impatience. Moreover, this riff-raff almost always falls unconsciously under the control of the little group of advanced people who do act with a definite aim, and this little group can direct all this rabble as it pleases, if only it does not itself consist of absolute idiots, which, however, is sometimes the case. It is said among us now that it is all over, that Pyotr Stepanovitch was directed by the International and Yulia Mihailovna by Pyotr Stepanovitch, while she controlled, under his rule, a rabble of all sorts. The more sober minds amongst us wonder at themselves now, and can't understand how they came to be so foolish at the time. What constituted the turbulence of our time and what transition it was we were passing through, I don't know, nor I think does anyone, unless it were some of those visitors of ours. Yet the most worthless fellows suddenly gained predominant influence, began loudly criticizing everything sacred, though till then they had not dared to open their mouths, while the leading people, who had till then so satisfactorily kept the upper hand, began listening to them and holding their peace. Some even simpered approval in a most shameless way. People like Lyamshin and Telyatnikov, like Gogol's Tentchotnikov, drivelling home‐bred editions of Radishov, wretched little Jews with a mournful but haughty smile, guffawing foreigners, poets of advanced tendencies from the capital, poets who made up with peasant coats and tarred boots for the lack of tendencies or talents, majors and colonels who ridiculed the senselessness of the service, and who would have been ready for an extra rouble to unbuckle their swords and take jobs as railway clerks, generals who had abandoned their duties to become lawyers, advanced mediators, advancing merchants, innumerable divinity students, women who were the embodiment of the woman question, all these suddenly gained complete sway among us, and over whom? Over the club, the venerable officials, over generals with wooden legs, over the very strict and inaccessible ladies of our local society. Since even Varvara Petrovna was almost at the beck and call of this rabble right up to the time of the catastrophe with her son, our other local Minervas may well be pardoned for their temporary aberration. Now all this is attributed, as I have mentioned already, to the International. This idea has taken such root that it is given as the explanation to visitors from other parts. Only lately Councillor Kubryakov, a man of 62, with the Stanislav Order on his breast, came forward uninvited and confessed in a voice full of feeling that he had beyond a shadow of doubt been for fully 3 months under the influence of the International. When with every deference for his years and services he was invited to be more definite, he stuck firmly to his original statement, though he could produce no evidence except that he had felt it in all his feelings, so that they cross-examined him no further. I repeat again, there was still even among us a small group who held themselves aloof from the beginning and even locked themselves up. But what lock can stand against the law of nature? Daughters will grow up even in the most careful families, and it is essential for grown-up daughters to dance. And so all these people, too, ended by subscribing to the governess's fund. The ball was assumed to be an entertainment so brilliant, so unprecedented, marvels were told about it. There were rumours of princes from a distance with lorgnettes, of 10 stewards, all young dandies, with rosettes on their left shoulder, of some Petersburg people who were setting the thing going. There was a rumour that Karmazinov had consented to increase the subscriptions to the fund by reading his Merci in the costume of the governesses of the district, that there would be a literary quadrille all in costume, and every costume would symbolize some special line of thought, and finally that honest Russian thought would dance in costume, which would certainly be a complete novelty in itself. Who could resist subscribing? Every one subscribed. Section 2. The programme of the fête was divided into 2 parts: the literary matinée from midday till 4 o'clock, and afterwards a ball from 10 o'clock onwards through the night. But in this very programme there lay concealed germs of disorder. In the first place, from the very beginning, a rumour had gained ground among the public concerning a luncheon immediately after the literary matinée, or even while it was going on, during an interval arranged expressly for it: a free luncheon, of course, which would form part of the programme and be accompanied by champagne. The immense price of the tickets, 3 roubles, tended to confirm this rumour. As though one would subscribe for nothing! The fête is arranged for 24 hours, so food must be provided, people will get hungry. This was how people reasoned in the town. I must admit that Yulia Mihailovna did much to confirm this disastrous rumour by her own heedlessness. A month earlier, under the first spell of the great project, she would babble about it to anyone she met, and even sent a paragraph to one of the Petersburg papers about the toasts and speeches arranged for her fête. What fascinated her most at that time was the idea of these toasts. She wanted to propose them herself, and was continually composing them in anticipation. They were to make clear what was their banner. What was it? I don't mind betting that the poor dear composed nothing after all. They were to get into the Petersburg and Moscow papers, to touch and fascinate the higher powers, and then to spread the idea over all the provinces of Russia, rousing people to wonder and imitation. But for toasts champagne was essential, and as champagne can't be drunk on an empty stomach, it followed that a lunch was essential too. Afterwards, when by her efforts a committee had been formed and had attacked the subject more seriously, it was proved clearly to her at once that if they were going to dream of banquets there would be very little left for the governesses, however well people subscribed. There were 2 ways out of the difficulty: either Belshazzar's feasts with toasts and speeches, and 90 roubles for the governesses, or a considerable sum of money with the fête only as a matter of form to raise it. The committee, however, only wanted to scare her, and had of course worked out a third course of action, which was reasonable and combined the advantages of both: that is, a very decent fête in every respect, only without champagne, and so yielding a very respectable sum, much more than 90 roubles. But Yulia Mihailovna would not agree to it. Her proud spirit revolted from paltry compromise. She decided at once that if the original idea could not be carried out, they should rush to the opposite extreme, that is, raise an enormous subscription that would be the envy of other provinces. "The public must understand," she said at the end of her flaming speech to the committee, "that the attainment of an object of universal human interest is infinitely loftier than the corporeal enjoyments of the passing moment; that the fête in its essence is only the proclamation of a great idea, and so we ought to be content with the most frugal German ball simply as a symbol, that is, if we can't dispense with this detestable ball altogether," so great was the aversion she suddenly conceived for it. But she was pacified at last. It was then that the literary quadrille and the other æsthetic items were invented and proposed as substitutes for the corporeal enjoyments. It was then that Karmazinov finally consented to read Merci; until then he had only tantalised them by his hesitation, and so eradicate the very idea of victuals from the minds of our incontinent public. So the ball was once more to be a magnificent function, though in a different style. And not to be too ethereal, it was decided that tea with lemon and round biscuits should be served at the beginning of the ball, and later on orchard and lemonade, and at the end even ices, but nothing else. For those who always and everywhere are hungry and, still more, thirsty, they might open a buffet in the farthest of the suite of rooms and put it in charge of Prohorovitch, the head cook of the club, who would, subject to the strict supervision of the committee, serve whatever was wanted at a fixed charge, and a notice should be put up on the door of the hall that refreshments were extra. But on the morning they decided not to open the buffet at all for fear of disturbing the reading, though the buffet would have been 5 rooms off the White Hall in which Karmazinov had consented to read Merci. It is remarkable that the committee, and even the most practical people in it, attached enormous consequence to this reading. As for people of poetical tendencies, the marshal's wife, for instance, informed Karmazinov that after the reading she would immediately order a marble slab to be put up in the wall of the White Hall with an inscription in gold letters, that on such a day and year, here in this place, the great writer of Russia and of Europe had read Merci on laying aside his pen, and so had for the first time taken leave of the Russian public represented by the leading citizens of our town, and that this inscription would be read by all at the ball, that is, only 5 hours after Merci had been read. I know for a fact that Karmazinov it was who insisted that there should be no buffet in the morning on any account, while he was reading, in spite of some protest from members of the committee that this was rather opposed to our way of doing things. This was a position of affairs while in the town people were still reckoning on a Belshazzar feast, that is, on refreshments provided by the committee. They believed in this to the last hour. Even the young ladies were dreaming of masses of sweets and preserves, and something more beyond their imagination. Every one knew that the subscriptions had reached a huge sum, that all the town was struggling to go, that people were driving in from the surrounding districts, and that there were not tickets enough. It was known, too, that there had been some large subscriptions apart from the price paid for tickets. Varvara Petrovna, for instance, had paid 300 roubles for her ticket, and had given almost all the flowers from her conservatory to decorate the room. The marshal's wife, who was a member of the committee, provided the house and the lighting; the club furnished the music, the attendance, and gave up Prohorovitch for the whole day. There were other contributions as well, though lesser ones, so much so indeed that the idea was mooted of cutting down the price of tickets from 3 roubles to 2. Indeed, the committee were afraid at first that 3 roubles would be too much for young ladies to pay, and suggested that they might have family tickets, so that every family should pay for one daughter only, while the other young ladies of the family, even if there were a dozen specimens, should be admitted free. But all their apprehensions turned out to be groundless. It was just the young ladies who did come. Even the poorest clerks brought their girls, and it was quite evident that if they had had no girls it would never have occurred to them to subscribe for tickets. One insignificant little secretary brought all his 7 daughters, to say nothing of his wife and a niece into the bargain, and every one of these persons held in her hand an entrance ticket that cost 3 roubles. It may be imagined what an upheaval it made in the town. One has only to remember that as the fête was divided into two parts, every lady needed two costumes for the occasion, a morning one for the matinée and a ball dress for the evening. Many middle class people, as it appeared afterwards, had pawned everything they had for that day, even the family linen, even the sheets, and possibly the mattresses, to the Jews who had been settling in our town in great numbers during the previous 2 years, and who became more and more numerous as time went on. Almost all the officials had asked for their salary in advance, and some of the landowners sold beasts they could ill spare, and all simply to bring their ladies got up as marchionesses and to be as good as anybody. The magnificence of dresses on this occasion was something unheard of in our neighbourhood. For a fortnight beforehand the town was overflowing with funny stories which were all brought by our wits to Yulia Mihailovna's court. Caricatures were passed from hand to hand. I have seen some drawings of the sort myself in Yulia Mihailovna's album. All this reached the ears of the families who were the source of the jokes. I believe this was the cause of the general hatred of Yulia Mihailovna which had grown so strong in the town. People swear and gnash their teeth when they think of it now, but it was evident, even at the time, that if the committee were to displease them in anything, or if anything went wrong at the ball, the outburst of indignation would be something surprising. That's why every one was secretly expecting a scandal, and if it was so confidently expected, how could it fail to come to pass? The orchestra struck up punctually at midday. Being one of the stewards, that is, one of the 12 young men with a rosette, I saw with my own eyes how this day of ignominious memory began. It began with an enormous crush at the doors. How was it that everything, including the police, went wrong that day? I don't blame the genuine public; the fathers of families did not crowd, nor did they push against anyone, in spite of their position. On the contrary, I am told that they were disconcerted even in the street, at the sight of the crowd shoving in a way unheard of in our town, besieging the entry and taking it by assault instead of simply going in. Meanwhile the carriages kept driving up, and at last blocked the street. Now, at the time I write, I have good grounds for affirming that some of the lowest rabble of our town were brought in without tickets by Lyamshin and Liputin, possibly, too, by other people who were stewards like me. Anyway, some complete strangers who had come from the surrounding districts and elsewhere were present. As soon as these savages entered the hall they began asking where the buffet was, as though they had been put up to it beforehand, and learning that there was no buffet, they began swearing with brutal directness, and an unprecedented insolence. Some of them, it is true, were drunk when they came. Some of them were dazed like savages at the splendour of the hall, as they had never seen anything like it, and subsided for a minute, gazing at it open mouthed. This great white hall really was magnificent, though the building was falling into decay. It was of immense size, with 2 rows of windows, with an old fashioned ceiling covered with gilt carving, with a gallery with mirrors on the walls, red and white draperies, marble statues nondescript but still statues with heavy old furniture of the Napoleonic period, white and gold, upholstered in red velvet. At the moment I am describing a high platform had been put up for the literary gentlemen who were to read, and the whole hall was filled with chairs, like the parterre of a theatre, with wide aisles for the audience. But after the first moments of surprise, the most senseless questions and protests followed. "Perhaps we don't care for a reading. We've paid our money. The audience has been impudently swindled. This is our entertainment, not the Lembkes." They seemed, in fact, to have been let in for this purpose. I remember specially an encounter in which the princeling with the stand up collar and the face of a Dutch doll, whom I had met the morning before at Yulia Mihailovna's, distinguished himself. He had, at her urgent request, consented to pin a rosette on his left shoulder and to become one of our stewards. It turned out that this dumb wax figure could act after a fashion of his own if he could not talk. When a colossal pock-marked captain, supported by a herd of rabble following at his heels, pestered him by asking "which way to the buffet," he made a sign to a police sergeant. His hint was promptly acted upon, and in spite of the drunken captain's abuse, he was dragged out of the hall. Meantime the genuine public began to make its appearance and stretched in three long files between the chairs. The disorderly elements began to subside, but the public, even the most respectable among them, had a dissatisfied and perplexed air. Some of the ladies looked positively scared. End of Part 3, Chapter 1, Sections 1 and 2a. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine.